Teeth wax slowly down the street with the brim pulled way down low. Ain't no sound but the sound of his feet. Machine guns ready to go. Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat? Out of the doorway the bullets rip to the sound of the beat. Ah!
Say there, stranger. Remember me? I'm the stranger who stalks your sanity. Well, in any case, that's my intro line for the moment. I wonder if it sounds naff or a little bit pretentious or over the top. By the way, I'm using that cut from the cover of Another One Bites the Dust by Pamplemousse to introduce the series of talks on the Great Recovery. But I have another preference, which I will use if I can get permission for 20 or 30 seconds from that other song. But for now, I'll let this stand. And I will continue here with talk number 2 in the series on the dawn of the Great Recovery. It comes to you with a rather grandiose, perhaps, title, The Core Revelation in Heart and Mind. Now, you may have noted that I uploaded a talk that I originally posted in December of 2002 called You Are Living in an Altered State. And I suggested that you might listen to that as preparation for these ongoing talks. And the key meme in that talk was mind revelation moment. So I suggested that we are now, that was 2022, so let's say you remember 2020 to 2022, right? What happened in the world. And what I'm suggesting to you is that out of that event that happened in the world, which touched the lives of so many billions of people, that there was the opportunity for a mind revelation moment. So I'll elaborate on what I mean by that. And at the same time, I will add a second factor, which is a heart revelation moment. And these two revelations, which might be called insights, imperative, profound insights, and I'll get back to that word insight a little further on in these talks and change it and twerk it a little. What I'm suggesting, what I'm proposing to you, what I'm telling you by way of personal advice, hey bro, hey babe, it's just you and I here. We may as well be stranded on a tropical island, just the two of us, you and I. There's no we. And I'm here to give you my personal advice. And you can take it or leave it. So my personal advice is that to enjoy and benefit and participate in the Great Recovery, you ground yourself on two revelations, two core insights, one of mind and one of heart. To begin with mind revelation, I can tell you up front, short and sweet, in no uncertain terms, that this is an event when you realize not only how your own mind works autonomously, but also how certain influences work upon your mind. In other words, how you are living in an altered state, or how you are living in a condition where you are targeted by mind control programs. And this is an epic and life-changing revelation for everyone who can see it and accept it. And of course, it's natural to wonder, well, when did this revelation begin? When did this core insight start to become obvious to certain members of the human race. And I believe it's worthwhile to take a moment to put it into a temporal context, to put it into an historical complex. Now, I won't say that there is an exact and specific moment when the mind revelation that tells you and shows you how you are engaged in psychological warfare with the predicites. That's what it does. I won't nail it down to a specific moment, but I'll give you some key moments in the timeline, and I'll state them in the form of the historical narrative. To begin, it's fair to say that the mind revelation began in September of 2001 with that event. And what do I mean by that? Well, something happened in the world, and not only did something actually happened, an attack, a terrorist attack, you might call it, but the world at that moment began to be, the attention of people in the world began to be inundated with a narrative about what happened. So there was an event and there was a narrative about that event. September 2001. However, it came to be realized that the narrative about the event was not true, and it was not accurate or evidentially founded, or even did it even make sense? Nevertheless, the media and the people who handle the media to inform and program the public exerted tremendous effort in developing this narrative. And so it was a shocking moment. I want to refresh your attention with the notion of what is called traumatic mind control. So traumatic mind control is a technique of psychological warfare. It works simply by orchestrating a situation that throws the witnesses of that situation into shock. And then when they, trauma-based mind control, and when they are in the shock of the trauma of that event, they are susceptible to receive information about the event without exerting critical judgment. So the efficacy of trauma-based mind control is that it allows the perpetrators to program the minds of those who are subjected to the shocking event in any way they like, because the mind is vulnerable. When you're afraid and shocked is usually the case, although this can be changed, but usually your faculties of judgment and comprehension, critical thinking, are diminished. Therefore, it is the ideal opportunity for perpetrators who want to infect your mind with deception to prey upon you at that moment. This is how trauma-based mind control works. So that event was an outstanding example of the psychological war in which the world now finds itself, in which some members, not we, but you and I perhaps, together can find a way to recover not only from the trauma, but also from the narrative of deception and deceit and division constructed upon the trauma. Clear enough? Here's a place where I might add a personal anecdote that illustrates this situation. I was alive. I remember vividly the day at the University of Maine in the winter, in November of 1963, when JFK was assassinated. And that was a massive trauma that hit that campus. I was walking around that campus in the snow, and every single person, including myself, was in shock. But what we did not know at that time was that we were being subjected and targeted by an act of trauma-based mind control. And almost immediately after the event happened, there was a narrative about the event. And the narrative said that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman. And then Lee Harvey Oswald was shot, and it went on and on and on. And the drama went on for a long time. And it is a fact, a known fact, and there's much evidence to support this, that over 40 people who may have had or certainly did have intimate knowledge of what actually happened with that assassination were killed, either murdered or killed by stage accidents. So bear in mind that those who use trauma-based mind control to target you and I are willing to go to the use of lethal force to maintain their deceptive narratives. So why am I bringing up the JFK assassination? I want to point out to you the time lag that occurs between an operation, a psyop of mind control being committed, and the time that it becomes exposed. So in the case of that assassination in 1963, it took me 50 years until 2003 before I informed myself of the actual evidence-based provable narrative of what happened. And I did that thanks to the dedicated work and the selfless work, not asking for compensation, not asking to be paid, of a number of dedicated sleuths who eventually appeared on the internet with their results. Detectives, dedicated sleuths, including people who would dedicated 40 years of their personal life and time to find out the truth about the JFK assassination. So there was a long time lapse before that truth became known and the official narrative was exposed as deceit. And remember, deceit is always essential to trauma-based mind control. But now, if you come forward to 9/11, can ask yourself the question, well, if it took 40 or 50 years for the truth of the JFK assassination to be revealed and the deceit to be exposed, how long did it take for the 9/11 event? And you will find, I think you will agree, if you've investigated it, that it did not take 40 or 50 years. In fact, it began almost immediately in September of 9/11. People began working on it. Independent sleuths and detectives took on that case. They decided to solve that crime. And eventually their findings appeared on the internet. Then eventually what they found out that exposed the deceit was removed from the internet. So you could find more things exposing the psyop of 9/11 on the internet 5, 8, 10 years ago than you can now. But the point is that it took much less time for the deception of the narrative of the psyop to be exposed. So you see what I'm doing here? I characterize those moments of exposure of the JFK assassination, 9/11, and many other things that I could name. Those were mind revelation moments in both senses. They not only gave you the opportunity to see how your own mind works with the exercise of reason, common sense, and your critical faculties, but they also gave you the opportunity to see what's working on your mind and who's working on your mind. And that happened relatively fast. So, exposure of the JFK deceit, 40, 50 years. It wasn't until about 2011, 2012 that I got onto it by watching The Men Who Killed Kennedy and Evidence of Revision, which are long documentaries exposing that event and showing the truth of that event by the exercise of critical thinking. Then from 9/11, it didn't take so long, did it? And what about 2020 to 2022? How long did it take for that event to be challenged and exposed? Well, it happened almost instantaneously with the event. Now, that is a real, urgent, imperative mind revelation moment. You could say, to use a loose example, someone committed a crime in your neighborhood or in your business, and it took years before the crime was exposed. Or maybe it took a year or 6 months or 1 month. Maybe someone in the company you work in was selling trade secrets or embezzling funds, and it took a month or two before that came to light. But imagine that you can be aware of a crime being committed simultaneously with the commitment of the crime. And this is what happens. So you see there's an increasing velocity of realization going through these few examples. Of course, there are many more, as you know. There are many more examples of psyops and attacks upon human sanity, attacks upon ordinary life by the predicites. In that context, I want to alert you to the expectation that I will, here and there in these talks on the Great Recovery, be touching on extremely controversial subjects and topics, which I know, and you may know as well, are under taboo. You can't talk about them on a public medium, and I may even already be risking the removal of this YouTube talk by what I'm saying. So I will promise you, I guarantee that I will go to the core of what needs to be said, and I will attempt to do it skillfully and cunningly in order to communicate to you what is so important to me for advancing the Great Recovery. So there was an event that happened not too long ago, and I spoke about it at the time, as many others did, because it was a crime against humanity, perhaps the greatest crime against humanity ever committed. And it was being exposed during the time it was being imposed. And I called it the bunny bug because it's a peculiar illness that makes you sniff your nose like a rabbit, you see. Well, remember, there's a good side to that, because rabbits, dogs, and other animals, when they sniff their nose, they're sniffing out the trail that leads them to their prey. They're looking for what they want to find. So sniffing your nose during that event has two meanings. Either you believed that you had caught the bunny bug, or you were sniffing out what the story about the bunny bug really is. So can I even say this? The Latin word for rabbit is lepus. And so we call the rabbit species the lepine species. So we have canines, felines, anthropines, lepines. So there was a plague. Let's call it the lepine plague. And I can say to you, or can I, without risk of losing this talk, that the lepine plague was a psyop. I can't say it in another way. I've already had one talk removed for saying it in another way, more literally speaking. I recorded a talk that was simply a reading of the introduction to the 2021 edition of Not in His Image, And there was one sentence when I said that in the wrong way. I said it in the way that the managers of these social media platforms do not allow you to say. So I'm going to be careful when I touch on such matters and such taboo subjects, as I will do from time to time in these talks. All right then, coming around to the other factor of what is required in the foundation of the Great Recovery: a revelation of mind and a revelation of heart. Recovery is restoration. You have the opportunity to restore common sense, sanity, critical thinking, discernment, discrimination, and the right use of empathy and compassion, not the illusion of empathy and compassion. These are factors in your own mind and emotional life that can be corrected and improved and healed and restored in the Great Recovery. But what about that factor of the revelation in heart? This has to go along with your participation. You can't participate without the revelation in heart, or the revelation of heart. Let me see if I can conclude by giving you an introductory profile of that revelation or that imperative insight. I'll start with this question. Have you ever heard of the adult-child syndrome? Could you define it? Can you define the expression adult-child? Do you know anything about it? Well, I know something about it from my personal experience, and a lot of what I'm saying to you in these talks comes from that experience, which I had, to my great benefit and good fortune, in the United States in the late 1980s and through the 1990s. That occurred when I participated in the recovery movement of that time. As I've said, there is a parallel between the steps or phases of the Great Recovery now and that original recovery movement, which was an historical and cultural event of tremendous magnitude and touched the lives and transformed the lives of many people. And I had the good fortune, even though I have been all my life something of an outsider and a loner, to participate in the recovery movement. Now, I am against therapy. I am against Freudian therapy and the paradigm of Freudian psychoanalysis, which I find to be despicable. And I am equally so against Jungian analytic psychology and the Jungian paradigm. And I have never been inclined to go to a therapist. Well, hold on a minute. Isn't the recovery movement a therapy movement? Yes, it is. But it is a therapy movement constructed in a unique way based on the paradigm of Alcoholics Anonymous, introduced by Bill Wilson. So what did I do when I went to those rooms? This is the language we used to use. I went into those rooms for a meeting of ACA, Adult Children Anonymous, which I did hundreds of times. What happened in those rooms? Well, ACA, like the others modeled on AA, is what you might call a group therapy event. But there is no therapist. There are only the participating members, the individuals who come into the room. And there are some formalities to begin with, just to get on track with the meeting. And there is someone who heads the meeting, but they do not head the discussion that emerges in the course of the meeting. They just set up the meeting with a little 5-minute introduction, and then it goes to sharing. And the way it used to work is that one person would volunteer to share for that 1-hour meeting, and they would share from anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, and the rest of the meeting would be dedicated to open participation. However, there were strict rules for recovery. There were strict rules for the discussions that went on in that room. And one of those rules, which I equally apply to the Great Recovery now, is that there is no crosstalk. So, myself and others sat in those rooms with people we didn't know, with strangers. We sat there with strangers. They're not people that we generally knew outside of the rooms. They might be, but most often they were not. We only knew each other by first name. They who came into the room only knew each other by first name. And what did they do? They poured their guts out. They simply talked about what had happened to them. And they talked about the trauma of their childhood, dysfunctional families, all sorts of things. It was, in fact, simply a confessional procedure. But there was no crosstalk. This rule was strict and rigorous, meaning that no one member of the group commented on the contribution of any other member by interpretation, analysis, or criticism. Likewise, I hold you to that standard. In the comments that you provide to these talks, respond to the message and the content of the talk, and do not comment on anyone else's comment, either positively or negatively. There's no crosstalk in the comment section on the Great Recovery. You get that? So there was no therapist, there was no mastermind, there was no one who was going to be the guru and healer to tell us how to solve the problems and how to overcome our suffering and how to recover from what was impeding us from being full and authentic, from being our full and authentic selves. Now, I won't say more about that except to make one final point, and I'll elaborate more on this point in the next talk. The core insight of heart that supported the recovery movement in all its variations, but especially in ACA, was the narcissistic wounding of the child. And those of us in that time all read a certain book called The Drama of the Gifted Child. And that book, more than any other, became the manual of adult child recovery. And I strongly suggest to you that you look into that book. There is some homework you can do for these talks. You don't have to. What I say ought to be essential and complete. I'll certainly try to make it so. But I'll also clue you in the description to some background homework you can do if you wish. Now, this book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, is the foundation manual to understand the revelation of heart. The revelation of heart is about you, yourself, your single and autonomous self, and what your heart requires to recover from whatever it is in life that hampers you from complete happiness, fulfillment, whatever hampers you, not only from surviving, but from thriving. And the core of that issue is the issue of self-love. So I will dedicate the next talk to explain the adult-child syndrome. And in that way, you will have the secure foundation for knowing if you wish to be in the Great Recovery, as well as for knowing exactly how to, let's say, initiate yourself into this incomparable moment of revelation and revolution. Enough said.